The global attention orbiting Apple in late 2025 has reached a notable moment again. And the ongoing conversation around immersive home entertainment hardware is louder than it has ever been, especially regarding the family of devices under the Apple TV 4K name, which for years has quietly shaped how entire households interact with televisions. Applications, living room networks, and even the invisible infrastructure behind smart home ecosystems. Because to understand the current anticipation, you must rewind to when the previous hybrid entertainment box solidified its relevance. With the 2022 release of the earlier generation powered by a 15 bionic silicon, a chip originally introduced inside the iPhone 13 family and later refined for stable, sustained workloads in a fanless home streaming environment. And it was in that era that Apple TV 4K transitioned from being regarded as a set-top accessory to being a core appliance. Not due to one single headline feature, but rather through a chain of iterative engineering decisions, signal processing maturity, network behavior improvements, deep codec support for high byte rates including H.265, HEVC, HDR10 Dolby Vision, and the broadening integration with home audio stacks enabled through the HDMI 2.1 port. And that foundation is exactly why the current rumor cycle around a possible 360 capable or AI smart surface inside a future Apple TV is convincing to so many analysts. Because Apple rarely rips up its design language unless it needs to. So when informed threads suggest the next model will maintain the same square black housing that made the Apple TV 4K, iconic to casual consumers and practically stackable under televisions next to soundbars, routers, and consoles, it sounds less like gossip and more like an industrial inevitability rooted in manufacturing efficiency, internal board layouts, injection mold tooling, antenna window tuning, and supply chain familiarity. And the discussion has also tracked the same cadence of Sony sensor rumor cycles for years, except now focused squarely on living room connectivity. As the whispers say, the next unit will incorporate the in-one chip to manage Wi-Fi and Bluetooth radio traffic, enabling what would theoretically be the first Apple TV model to support Wi-Fi 7 throughput, a generational leap in 2.4 GHz, 5 GHz, and 6 GHz tri-band spectrum performance that supports 320 MHz channels, 4096Q AM modulation, multi-link operation, reduced latency scheduling, and cleaner OFDMA partitioning, ideally suited for 8K streaming workloads or high-traffic 4K workflows in multi-device homes where interference from microwaves, cordless phones, neighbors' routers, and even glass reflections can impact signal behavior. And at the same time, the suggestion of including Bluetooth 6 support means improved isochronous channel behavior, tighter clock sync, better audio peripheral understanding, higher quality controller communication, more resilient multi-point flows, and most importantly, less unpredictable controller dropouts, which have historically plagued people who paired gamepads, headphones, or accessibility devices like sip and puff controllers to earlier Apple boxes. But it must be said again and again, the N1 chip can only deliver its maximum value if the router and ISP pipe behind your living room can actually sustain it. Because Wi-Fi 7 is only as fast as the weakest link in its path. So a home on 100 Mbps streaming fiber will never see the full-spec headline potential of Wi-Fi 7. But the box will still see latency clarity improvements and smarter spectrum negotiation. And that realization flows directly into the broader ecosystem conversation, particularly the smart home hub functionality, which is a category Apple has shaped alongside iCloud, the HomeKit, the Matter 1.0 interoperability alliance architecture, and local device credential storage levied through end-to-end cryptographic handshakes. And those who have followed the Bloomberg rumor threads know that Apple may have prototype boards with more than the traditional HDMI plus Power plus Ethernet configuration. And the suggestion that a future Apple TV may one day pair with a first-party camera system introduces a massive conceptual shift in how a living room box is perceived. Because historically, 360 cameras like the Insta3601 RS360 edition, or the rotor spinning design from independent drone experiments represented fringe imaging, but Apple's internal R&D documentation on spatial capture, object-aware stitching, depth modeling, reference frames, neural engine object segmentation, and wide FOV photography suggests a roadmap where 360 video is not just stitched on desktops but computed live on device. And theoretically, pairing camera access on a living room box could make that Apple TV be an integrated FaceTime consumption center that doesn't need an iPhone or iPad to act as the camera host. Unlike the current model, which requires AirPlay continuity camera bridging when initiating FaceTime on televisions. But according to rumor timelines, this might not arrive until at least a 2026 or 2027 redesign cycle, meaning the immediate next Apple TV 4K model might only include passive support hooks for cameras via hidden connectors, driver stacks, or future USB-C port expansions, but none of that is confirmed and should be discussed as possibility space, not product facts. But what has more weight in the rumor is the silicon upgrade path, because Apple has a clear behavioral trend when designing big screen OS features, which historically starts in the most powerful mobile chip and then migrates into the Apple TV a generation later. So suggestions of integrating the iPhone 17 Pro chipset into this 4K box are logical from a sustained GPU, i.e. gaming and AI compute perspective. Specifically because the living room hardware body lacks active cooling fans and requires intelligent thermal throttling windows. And the iPhone 17 Pro, though fictional in mainstream marketing speak for now, sets a plausible conceptual class of silicon to support sustained 8K 60 FPS decoding, 4K 120 FPS upscaling, console-level GPU workloads for long gaming sessions, and AI inference such as image classification, on-device language context understanding, and generative UI suggestions. Features generally bucketed under what Apple calls Apple Intelligence as a brand identity layer for future device software. And if Apple integrates Apple Intelligence inside the Apple TV 4K for the first time, it would mean that every tap, Siri query, gamepad movement, and fleet controller input could be run through AI, understanding layers that help the box predict user intent before it happens. Meaning predictive app launching, smarter video queue preloading, spatial audio room mapping estimation, better search recall for Siri context, and object understanding for future humanoid gesture navigation. But to run that kind of neural inference, Apple will need to expand internal storage. And that expansion has actually been mentioned in several manufacturing leaks, suggesting the default jump from 64 gigabytes on earlier boxes now increasing to 128 gigabytes or even 256 gigabytes tier variants. Because Apple Intelligence models, even if quantized for living room hardware, would require more on-device model catching, OTA rollout, staging buffer space for app developers, and larger temporary memory windows for 45 MP reference images or 8K reference frames. But those increases will again likely vary by price tier. And that price tier conversation is one of the more interesting lateral industry stories, because Apple has been criticized for years regarding Apple TV pricing being perceived as premium compared to mid-range competitors like the Roku or Amazon's Fire TV sticks. But the November 2025 rumor threads expressed that Apple might intentionally return to early generation accessibility pricing ideology, aiming possibly for $8099 USD tier entry options, which once Apple's traditional price psychology for mass adoption, where the original Apple TV units and airport routers had household-friendlier price hooks. Not because Apple is cutting features, but because competition in the 360 and immersive home device space is heating up, and companies like Insta360 and mapping adjacent appetite for spherical or surround capture workflows, while independent projects have shown that users want immersive spatial video for real estate overview footage, VR content generation, UAV narrative, open-world mapping, drone shot reframing, and even for fast casual home storytelling sequences captured from upstairs staircases. So if Apple positions Apple TV 4K at an affordable tier with flagship chip architecture, consistent tvOS depth integration, and robust audio and codec understanding. It will likely become the de facto polished reference box for hybrid creators, even though it is a living room product, not a camera. And from a workflow perspective, Apple TV 4K has always carried a dual narrative as both a content consumption box and a pipeline for modern creators because of the way it handles color pipelines, HDR tone mapping, ROC, overlay UI rendering for sRGB, and BT 2020 negotiation internal reference, LUTS for Dolby Vision visual integrity, handshake with screens, and deep Ethernet stability when streaming from a NAS drive into cloud-backed editing suites. And that dual identity is also why people care about the audio pass-through conversation, which was cheerfully teased by Apple during the WWDC 2025 update cycle alongside tvOS 18, where audio pass-through was verbally promised for eventual support, meaning future Apple TV boxes could theoretically forward raw Dolby Digital or Dolby Atmos audio into expensive AVR units or high-end sound systems through an untouched bit stream, rather than decoding it internally and sending a compressed or altered output.